Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to today's meeting of the Planning Committee, Thursday, the 18th of July. I'll just read out the usual chair's introduction. Welcome to today's meeting. This is a public meeting and members of the public and press are permitted to report on the proceedings. Reporting includes filming, photography, making an audio recording and providing commentary on proceedings. Please note that this meeting is recorded and streamed live. The recordings are published on the relevant meeting page on the Council's website. By choosing to attend this public meeting, you are deemed to have given your consent to being filmed or recorded and for any footage to be broadcast or published. If the alarm sounds, the premises must be evacuated immediately. Do not spend time collecting personal belongings. All emergency escape routes are clearly signed. We go out the front of the building to the Assembly in the High Street. Members and other speakers are reminded to please use their microphones when speaking. This is really important, so it is picked up by the camera and the video. Lovely, thank you. Right, so do we have any substitutes, please, Margaret, or apologies?
There are no substitutes today, Chair, and no apologies. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Do we have any declarations of interest? This is anything relating to heritage, really. Councillor Barnes?
On Hot Market, member of the Civic Society and just about to start being a member of the Conservation Advisory Panel.
Oh, okay, lovely. Thank you, Jenny. That's great. Anybody else? No? Okay. So we've got the minutes from the previous meeting. This was on the 20th of June. It was a very long meeting, so thank you to Margaret for the extensive minutes. I think it was about 4.5 hours, our meeting. So if I just go through them page by page, we've got page 1, 2, 3. Councillor Kimberley?
Just to observe that my colleague Jill Becerra's name has been misspelt with a G rather than a J.
Apologies to Councillor De Sarah. I'll correct that. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Page 4, 5, 6, 7, 9 and 10. So if we just do that amendments and then they are deemed to be a true record. Yep, thank you. Okay, great. I don't believe we've got any public participation.
There's no public participation or no public representation, so it's not on the agenda at all.
Thank you so much. So the items today are reports, which are going to be really interesting, actually. So first of all, we've got the Planning Committee Annual Report 23-24, and this is being presented by Paul.
Thank you, Chair. So, members, we have, as we had last year, which was the first time that Planning Committee had presented an annual report, so this is the second of those, and I'll walk you through it. We set out within section 4 the matters that are being considered by the Planning Committee, which looked at around 36 applications, which created about 29 residential units of various different types. And you'll notice that in terms of householders, members only considered 2 applications, which I think is a change from previous years in terms of the volume of applications that Planning Committee were considering. We then look at the overall performance in section 5 of the planning service, because whilst we can look at the planning committee, it's also useful to be able to have a sight of how the rest of the service is performing. And you'll notice that I'm very pleased to see that within the team that we have is that performance is really quite good, that we are making great progress in terms of the service improvements that we are doing across the team, in terms of the percentage of applications that are determined either within time or within an agreed time with the applicants and their agents. But also we're looking at the number of approvals. Yes, it's quite high, but again, you'll see that there are a number of refusals, that it's not just approvals that the City Council are progressing through. One of the barometers, which you'll notice in paragraph 2, in terms of provision, is a 6 weeks determination rate for householder applications. And I say this is a barometer rather than an actual measure, because it's a barometer to not only performance, but also in terms of the quality of applications that we get in terms of whether they are ready for approval at the point of submission, rather than having to have amendments done to them. And you'll notice that 38% of those householder applications were determined within 6 weeks. And some of those even had amendments because of the processes in which we're looking to implement in terms of process and efficiencies. So again, in terms of performance, in terms of the planning service, we're really proud of what the team has been able to do. And whilst myself and Charlotte are the front faces of the team, particularly at Planning Committee, and you see some of the senior officers, there is a lot of hard work done behind the scenes in terms of the rest of the team. So again, that is worth talking about. In terms of the rest of section 5, it talks about service improvements and staffing. The team is now fully staffed with permanent members of staff. There is one interim member of the team who is working on the backlog, and you'll notice that the team were very grateful to receive some funding from the government in terms of clearing the remaining elements of backlog in which we are dealing with older applications. Section 6 talks about feedbacks and complaints, and yes, we have complaints, but we also have compliments, and you'll notice that within section 6.2 we, as a service, had the highest number of compliments across the whole of the council, which again we are hugely proud of. In terms of the complaints, we will always get complaints because of the nature of the service in which we provide, but again there were very few which were either partially upheld or upheld, and none were taken up by the Local Government Association in terms of the Ombudsman, the Local Government Ombudsman in terms of their inquiries. Across the into section 7 deals with appeals, and whilst we've had 14 appeal decisions across the year, we've had 86% dismissal rate, again, which is a really impressive statistic in terms of those decisions and showing that we are making the right decisions in terms of those things that we are doing. I've just highlighted 2 in 7.2 and 7.3 that are worthy of note. One is an application which was allowed with costs against the council, and I've set out the reasons why that was, and it's one of those things worthy of note of making sure that decisions are made accurately in accordance with policies and guidance that we publish. And again, just highlighting that point in 7.3 was the really good decision that we had on Broomhall Way Gypsy and Traveller site, where the inspector supported the planning committee's decision on all counts. Quite often you get some of them gone through, but actually in every single point that the planning committee refused the application on, the government inspector supported that position. And I think it's really good in highlighting how that a strategic policy within a plan is a strategic policy in the plan and should be kept, and not just because some developer feels that it needs to be deviated from for a particular reason. It's been there for a particular reason, and the councils have set out their strategic approach, and that should be followed. In section 8, we've added a section from last year's report just highlighting planning enforcement, and again you'll notice within the paragraph 8.3 setting out the number of cases received and investigated against closed, and you'll see not only over 23-24 did we receive more cases than the last 2 periods, but actually we closed substantially more. So it just shows what a fully staffed, efficient team can do, and again we're immensely proud with what the team has achieved. We've broken down the cases just to give you a flavour of those type of cases. And again, you will note that the majority of cases are unauthorised development. Somebody's built something wrong, but also you'll notice that 21% are untidy land, and that is a challenge that we are dealing with, and dealing with well, in my opinion. I won't go much more into paragraph 9 in terms of policy related matters. I think members will be aware of the current status of where we are in terms of a local plan. We have a housing supply at this moment in time, depending on how the government determine the standard test in terms of housing delivery. But at the moment in time, based upon the current information, we have a 4.99 year supply against the requirement for a 4-year supply. So again, we are in the right position. And again, there is a little bit in terms of where we're going in terms of the South Worcestershire review, development plan review, and also just highlighting those members who are on the joint advisory panel. So overall, what we have is that the Planning Committee has been part of this, I think, really important journey that the service has been on, and the improvements that have been made. And it's just showing that actually the officer and member working relationships are working really well in terms of the decisions that we are making. And it's one of those phrases that Mr. Rudge would say if he's here, that we are making the right decisions in the right places. And we are doing that jointly together and working as one team. And I think that is vastly important. So what the annual review is highlighting the good things that have happened. There is still work in progress. I won't hide behind that. There is still things to be done, but all being well, for next year, when we present the annual report, we'll be able to show further successes of the team and how that has further progressed. So thank you, Chair.
Yeah, thank you, Paul. For this report, everyone, what we have got is a recommendation for the committee to approve it, and the annual report will then be submitted to council. So really now I'd just like to open up the floor for any questions or commentary, please. Thank you. Pat.
Thank you. Paul, you talk about the quality of applications that you're getting and how that sometimes delays you. Is there anything more that, you know, you've got ideas about how that can be improved and what we can do with the website or whatever to try and improve the situation?
Through you, Chair. One of the things that we did last year, which isn't in the annual report because it was slightly before, is, if you remember, this committee approved a validation checklist. So that's step one, and we've allowed that sort of to bed in. The next steps are to refine that validation checklist and have meetings with local agents to be able to show the quality in which we expect, so that we can start to ramp up that quality, that we can tighten the level of applications that are submitted to us. So again, it's working in a way that I think is really important, is that you start slowly rather than, and you influence and encourage rather than causing any difficulty. So yes, those are steps that we're looking at going forward. Thank you.
Councillor Kingsley.
Yep, thank you, Chair. Firstly, just to say how pleasing it is to hear that you're fully staffed. I think my understanding is that's quite a relatively unusual in the current status. That's really good, and I get the impression that morale is good, and it sounds like it's a really good team. So that's great. I just wanted to ask. You referred at the end of your report to how you hope to see improvements towards the next year. Do you have any sort of further details you could share with us in terms of the actual specifics of what you'd be looking for, percentages, areas to work on, that sort of thing?
Through you, Chair. I try not to look at percentages, but in terms of improvements, one of the next stages that we're looking at in terms of improvement is in terms of a process improvement, so that we are being consistent across officers in terms of the way that they're dealing with things in a timely way, but also how they are approaching. So that may include things like more templates in terms of how we deal with members of the public, so that it's a consistent approach. So at the moment we have officers that are all working together for the one good. And this isn't a criticism of my officers by any stretch of the imagination, but there are those that do things slightly differently. So what we're doing is we've allowed us to be fully staffed. We're now going to narrow that lane so that we have consistency in terms of timings, in terms of approach, in terms of how we get to that decision-making process, so that customers will have a very clear understanding of when they're dealing with Worcester City Council, they know exactly what they are going to get, they know of when they're going to get it, and that's consistent with whichever officer you deal with. So that's my next step and next stage.
Councillor Cross.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you. Yeah, really encouraging report. An aspect that I really appreciate about planning is the training that we're seeing now being provided to all members and available to all councillors, which I think, as said in the first training session, it really helps with the with casework with residents. So just please keep it up. Really appreciate it. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Have I got any other questions for officers? Comments?
Really, you know, on an extraordinarily robust performance.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think, you know, as chair, it's a real pleasure actually to see the percentages and facts in this report that reflect how we were feeling, how the service was going, with the positive comments we're getting from residents and developers. You know, 6 weeks, less than 6 weeks for turning around an application when other authorities are well behind. You know, that's outstanding, and it gives confidence to the building industry actually that they can build, and actually, you know, a quick decision helps homeowners have positivity with their tenders and their plans for their family. So, you know, that's really great. And it, but obviously it's not just about speed. I really like your emphasis on quality and getting the quality up of applications as well. So yeah, and of course also the enforcement aspect. I mean, that's astounding in this year that you've closed 380 cases. I mean, how many is that a day? That's actually an astounding statistic. So I'd just like to say thank you to every single officer involved in this, and you're clearly working as a team. There is still obviously improvements. Of course, we want to be gold standard. We want to be the best planning service in the country. So with that ambition, I'm quite happy for this to go to council. Is there anybody else ready to vote for this? Yeah, okay. So can I see all hands in favour of this committee approving the annual report 23-24 and submitting to council for information? Thank you, that's unanimous. Great, thank you. Okay, so now we've got the Heritage at Risk in Worcester report, update and review from Paul Collins.
Thank you, Chair. If we can have the on screen. Good afternoon. It's a great pleasure to come to you for my annual visit to update you on the Heritage at Risk report for 2024. Next one. Oh, I've got the thing, haven't I? Sorry. That's our cover star, which I'll come round to a little bit later on. I've gone the wrong way. So currently we have 20 buildings and structures, 3 scheduled monuments and 1 conservation area at risk. There's 1 heritage asset to be removed from the register, which I'll go into a bit later on, and the following are undergoing repairs, restoration work or maintenance, and it's a testimony to keeping the register as a spotlight on a problem, and it can focus initiatives and produce action. So Church of St Helens, our only grade 2-star building featuring on it. There are some remaining works on the tower, stonework on the tower at the rear, which I'll come into talk about that a little bit later on. Grade 2 listed City Walls Road section south of the Butts. There have been long-standing problems there which are hopefully being resolved before the end of this month. 3 Greenhill Bath Road, which I'll come on to a little bit later on, and locally listed Iceworks, which came very close to coming off the register, but we have a number of criteria, one criterion being occupation of the building after the works are completed, and it's not quite ready for that yet. So look in a bit more detail. There's the Church of St Helen. Top photograph was taken a few weeks ago. The tower is the structure to the right. There's still some stonework repairs, and I'm in regular contact with the project director who's supervising the works and coordinating them for the church. And I say to them, are we complete enough for it to come off? And she says, I'd rather it stay on because it's helpful when I'm applying for funding, for it to be on our Heritage at Risk register. And that's another aspect of maintaining the register and compiling the register and reviewing it annually. This is that stretch of the city wall. It collapsed probably about 3 years ago, was substantially rebuilt with some concrete reinforcement and which has arrested the collapse problem. This is a section that didn't collapse, but is still thought to be a little bit insecure, and they've had a great deal of difficulty in finding a structural engineer who's been prepared to sign it off. But they now believe that they have got somebody who is prepared to do that, and they should be visiting it before the end of this month. So I'm looking forward to not including this in the report when I present it next year. 3 Greenhill Bath Road. It's an interesting one. When it was first put on the register, we thought it was unoccupied. We found, to our surprise, it's actually occupied. We put a lot of work in, and here we've been talking about the teamwork within planning from Paul Rand's report earlier. I'd just like to highlight team working within the council, within separate sections. So I've been working with enforcement, housing, property management and property standards, and the 5 sections of the council have worked together, and we've produced a plan which is going to sort out the major structural problems which are effectively in the roof and in the stairs. If you know the road and you know how it slopes down to Greenhill, there is a basement which is in effect the kitchen, and the lower part of the stairs that you would use to get down into that are missing. So that is that's hopefully being rectified. So we hope that that's another building that will be off the register this time next year. The iceworks I mentioned, locally listed. It's been worked on a lot. They saved the work on the historic building, the one that we see in the photographs, till last. They built the enabling development around it, which was to enable to generate the funding for the restoration of the old building. They were hoping to have the first tenants in towards the start of this year, but as it says up there, the work on site will not be completed until October this year, after which the units will be let. And at the point that we've got some people living in it, that's the point that we can look to taking it off the register. So hopefully this time next year, I should be reporting as a building removed from the register rather than one that's still on for a reason to be stated. Harmonising various heritage risk lists in 2022. The following buildings or structures were added to the register from Save Britain's Heritage version. So we had 13 the Tithing, the St Cuthbert's Chapel at Malvern Road, Lower Wick, and Save have updated their list and added 2 more. They've added the former Gaumont Cinema in Foregate Street, 21 Foregate Street, latterly in Buzz Bingo in its later days, and it's actually 26 to 26A Bath Road, and we'll have a look at those. They have different criteria for including things on their heritage risk register. One of the reasons that we don't include something is if there is an extant planning consent for works on the building, and there is one, and it runs out on the 23rd of September this year. So we will follow this up before then to find out if there is any intention for that planning application to be enacted, and if there's anything that we can do, discharge, pre-commencement conditions, some works or something, in order to get something moving on that. But that's the status of that one. This is St Cuthbert's, which has been out of use for a number of years. There was a consent which had been partly enacted, which is why we hadn't included it on our version of the register. Save included it on theirs because they had different criteria. They now think that there is it's being used, and they are checking it out there. Case officer Liz Fuller is looking into that, and she's going to get back to me. If they're satisfied to take it off their register, we'll remove it off our version of ours. There's Gaumont, 21 Foregate Street, opened 1935, major music venue in the 50s through to about 74. As people often say about it, it's easier to list the famous names that didn't appear there than to list the ones who did. Absolutely everybody appeared there several times in many cases. Closed due to COVID in March 2020, and then the decision was made not to reopen it in July, and it's stayed empty ever since. And obviously it's a closed structure, it's subject to graffiti. You can see vegetation growing out of it, so it is of concern. But as we discussed, talking to colleagues earlier this week, actually finding out, as in a number of these properties, exactly who one talks to about them is not the most straightforward thing at all. And then this, quite the star of the report this year, is also put forward by Save Britain's Heritage. It's 26 to 26A. I will amend that before it gets published. It's a purpose-built farrier shop, thought to be one of the last one built in the country. And believe it or not, if you had to take your horse in to have its shoe attended to, you walked it through that horseshoe-shaped opening on the left-hand side of the building. And Mr. Round was mentioning in the training, which some of you were at earlier, about the resource, one of the resources we have, which is the old planning applications. We actually have the plans for this building. They might be 111 years old, but we've actually got them. And also the handwritten notes of the architect explaining his reasoning behind it. So that's a really, really interesting building. So we're pleased to add that one to the register. So development proposals are in progress for the following buildings: the Corn Exchange in Angel Street, and the Scala Theatre in Angel Street and Angel Place. I think we're in the process of going out to tender on it. I believe that's what I was told. But the wheels are in motion on those. So their priority has been downgraded, their risk priority. So you can see the Corn Exchange has gone to the lowest grade of priority, which is the one with sort of least at risk, which is priority F. So the conditions are being discharged. There's an application through for doing those. They get dripped through from time to time. I get them on a regular basis. And the Scala Theatre is in the same situation, because effectively, although there are two buildings, it is one development that is happening. Changes in condition and priority. Because of the fact that there are consents, and those consents are being processed and worked through, we are reducing the condition risk of the Scala Theatre from poor to fair. And on 3 of the others, the priority has been downgraded. So 55 to 57 Lowesmore, there is actually work going on there, although it looks even worse than it normally does. In as much as the windows are out at the front, but they're out because they're looking to replace them. And boundary walls to the College Green, there's a structural engineer visiting again later on towards the end of this month. And the Gilding House on the Royal Worcester Porcelain site, there is actually a planning application in process with the authority at the moment, so that's got itself downgraded. So we can look at that. People will recognise this building. The windows were boarded up, the boards have been taken out, there's work being done on the roof. So finally something is moving on that. This one is in the grounds of the cathedral, a collapse of a wall. There's been a number of issues, structural ones, to do with insurers, various other things. It's held the whole process up for not only a couple of years, but there's movement. It's an unfortunate choice of word there, but there is movement on this one as well. And there's the Gilding House, half of which is in residential use, but the other half isn't. And there is an application in now to bring the other half up to spec and to get it occupied, harking back again to what Mr. Round was saying in the training earlier. Summary of the duration of the entries on the risk register, first published in 2006, shows the number added. It shows that most have been on the register for 10 years or less, and that 3/4 of them have been included for 6 years or less. So that's quite good progress indeed. And finally, the building removed from the register is 1A Angel Street, which has been converted to residential use above. The new door has been added to the right-hand side, and there is a tenant for the shop below, which is going to be a cafe, but they haven't quite moved in yet. To give you some idea of how long these things take, I started with the authority in May 2015, and I visited this site the first week I was here. So it does take a while to work through these things, and I believe that is it. So happy to take questions, Chair, if there are any.
Great. Thank you, Paul. This is a report to note, so yeah, if we just have questions for officers. If I start with Councillor Stephen, then Councillor Amos, then Councillor Udall. Thank you.
Thank you very much for the report. Can you expand a little bit more information about the property on Bath Road, on the 26 Bath Road there, that horseshoe one? What's the plan for that?
It's a new one that's come to us quite recently. There we go. Sorry, it's a new one that's come to us quite recently from Save Britain's Heritage, so we're waiting for more information from the case officer on that one. It was incorporated into an engineering works at the back, but it seems that they don't use it anymore, and it only seems to be used as somewhere to park cars on the front. In fact, I did several visits down there. Mr. Rand was saying I'm often walking around the city. I walked down there several times to get that cover photograph with only one car on the front of it. So we shall know more and can report back to you next year. And when I get something, I can let you know, Councillor Stephen, as well. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Joe. I always find these reports interesting, although in many ways a bit depressing to see so much of our heritage at risk. Now, I know Dr. Collins will be expecting one question from me this afternoon, but I've actually got two, so if I just ask them one after the other, Chair. The first one obviously is on, well, obviously it is, page 28, local listed building 79 to 83 St John's, which is its site name, but local people know it as Zigzag and others. Obviously there has been progress on this in that the ugliness of the site has been hidden, but it doesn't alter the fact that the site is still there, empty and ugly and decrepit. Also, the report does say progress is being monitored. So could I just ask Dr. Collins for a bit more detail on that? Because this is one of those things that's gone on for years, false promises, false starts. So we do need to monitor progress, but also put a little bit of pressure. Well, no, I say a little bit, a hell of a lot of pressure on the applicants and others to get this building up and open and running so that St John's can be a completely nice area rather than have this awful ugly site hidden. My second question, Chair, if I may, and we had a briefing on heritage, and the site I want to just raise ticks every single box on the heritage that we had in the training before committee this afternoon. And indeed, in the introduction to this item, paragraph 2.3, it refers to registered battlefields. And obviously what I'm talking about is Powick Bridge. I know there is no planning application involved, but Council has passed unanimously a motion to ask our Chief Managing Director to coordinate work on it. And I raise it here even though there's not a planning application, because as I understand it, Chair, the planning does have some responsibility to ensure that this wonderful piece of our heritage doesn't suddenly all fall into the river due to delayed inaction by county highways. And I'm getting concerned. I had an absolutely absurd response from somebody, and the response was, well, the rest of it's not going to fall down. It's been there for 300 or 400 years. I mean, think of how stupid that statement is. Part of it has fallen down. And so I think that, Chair, is very much at risk. It is very much loved by the community. And we need to do what we can to put pressure on those responsible to get on and save it before the rest of it does fall down. So perhaps Dr. Collins can give us the benefit of his opinion on what else we can do other than what we're already doing on that particular issue as well.
Through you, Chair. Thank you very much, Councillor Amos. Dealing first of all with St John's, anticipating that you may ask me that question, I met with the developer on another one of his sites last week and told him that I was anticipating this question and I'd like something up to date to tell him. I emailed him and his agent and had a reply this morning, so this is about as hot off the press as you can get. There's an application in for building control, building regulations. There's an application in with us for discharge of conditions, and they've had a slightly worse than expected, but not really, when you consider how long the site's been like that, report from on the ground stability, which obviously they need to address before they can erect anything on the site. The heritage element, which is the caudal shop front, is stored securely in a sealed shipping container off-site. So that is ready to go back in, and it is included within the design of the new structure. So the applicant did say that he can appreciate that people can see there's apparently nothing happening, but as he said, there's a lot of behind-the-scenes stuff going on, and he's working within and to the letter of the consent that he's got on the site. So whereas in previous years, when you've raised this question, we have had less to comment, I would say that this year we've got a lot more to say, and it is looking more positive, but I do agree it is a situation that does need to be kept under continual review. The Powick Bridge is quite a difficult one, really, because it sounds like we're washing our hands with it, but it's the Malvern Hills side of the bridge that collapsed, not the Worcester City side of the bridge that collapsed. The administrative boundary runs through the middle of the River Team, and it's the Malvern Hills side that sustained the damage, and our side didn't sustain any damage. So the resources that we've got, and let's Councillor Udall knows better, the resources that we have, through your chair, are to work with our colleagues in Malvern Hills and with the County Council, because it is obviously a county bridge, and put what pressure we can on and relay to them the concern that you, as members of our authority and local residents, have over the issue. But it is regrettably outside our direct control.
Through Chair, if I just may follow up the second point, Dr. Collins. Thank you, Dr. Collins, for that. And don't take this the wrong way, but I think the point that bit's in Malvern and this bit's in Worcester will cut no ice with the public. I think they don't give a damn which side of some boundary it's on. But my argument to that would be, well, yes, but it's at risk if the Malvern end or County Council highways don't deal with the Malvern bit that's fallen down, because then a bit in Worcester will fall down. And that is the concern. And I think it really does need pressure, because remember, we're now half a year on, not a single brick or block has been repaired. And what's going on now is just work to get an assessment of what work needs to be done. So no work is being done because they haven't assessed what work needs to be done. And then I was told at County last week, well, work might not be finished till next year. Well, next year in my book goes from January to December 2025. So I think as far as Worcester's concerned, our argument would be, yes, but our bit is standing at the moment, but it won't be if they don't fix the Malvern Hills bit.
Oh, well, I can't but agree with you, but as I'm saying, I mean, we are in pretty much the same position that you're in, and Councillor Udall's in, and various other people are in that we can apply pressure and we can ask questions, but we have no direct powers to operate it. Yes, the damage was caused by material coming down the river, striking the bridge abutment, and it could be that the one on our side could be equally vulnerable to something, you know, in a slightly different position coming down. So those are very good questions and ones that we should ask of county bridge engineers. Do you want to say something? No? Okay. Okay, thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Udall?
Thank you, Chair. I've got a few questions, if I may. Sure. And I'm asking partially some of these questions due to my own ignorance, so you'll have to educate me. The issue relating to St Cuthbert's Chapel in Lower Wick, I'm acutely aware this is probably the oldest building west side of the river. It predates St John's Church as the first religious location in St John's. I heard what you said about it could be taken off the list if we now know it's going to be occupied and used. Unless I've got that misunderstood what you said there, does it matter how it's being used? Doesn't matter how it's being occupied, because certain occupation potential has got potential risk for the building. So I'm just a little bit concerned about that.
That's a very good question.
I know.
We would look for a use that required regular, not shall I say storage, not using it as a warehouse or a store or something like that, but some sort of use that required regular entry and exit from the public, changing the air inside it, all that sort of stuff. So it depends what they come back with. But so we wouldn't simply say, oh, well, we're storing stuff in it or something like that. We wouldn't accept that.
That's useful.
as a valid use.
That helps me a lot. And I think you've answered my next question, which is regarding the Caudles shop. A lot of confusion about where it's actually being stored and whether we actually have confirmation that it's safe. But I think you said it was in a shipping container on site. Have you seen it yourself, and is it safe?
I've seen photographs of it, and it's in one of those half-length shipping containers on a site that the applicant owns in Barbourne.
Obviously, I'm concerned that that doesn't mysteriously disappear at some point in the future.
Through you, Chair, before it was taken down, there was a detailed diagram made of it, and it's almost like a numbering kit of parts, so we know which bits go where.
My penultimate question,
Okay.
again, it's based on ignorance, and it's interesting, bear in mind what you just said about Powick Bridge, or as my grandmother would have said, Poik Bridge. It's the motor site at Earl's Court, which is actually in Malvern Hills District Council area rather than Worcester City. I'm aware of some of the recent works in the building and the construction works adjacent to it has caused some significant damage to what's there, especially when they pulled up the entire public footpath and damaged some of the bricks underneath. I know that English Heritage have been involved in some aspects of some of the work, but how much power and influence do we have with Malvern Hills to ensure it is actually returned to its former order, and maybe to gain some information boards in the area to actually show people what actually was there previously?
We're in pretty much the same territory as we can work with colleagues. I would say that my fellow conservation officers and I, we meet quarterly, and we do talk about these things, and that's a very useful forum for which we can keep each other up to date and remind each other of these near to or cross-boundary issues.
And my final question, if I may, Chair, it's one which has been raised with me considerably in the last couple of weeks, which is about a dock building which is not on any of your lists, but is considered to be an important heritage site in St John's. That is the Bush Pub. I'm not sure if you're aware of it. It's been empty and not used for some time, but it's very much a historical pub, and it's got some very historical aspects within inside it, traditional Victorian, Georgian architecture. It's beginning to crumble, and it's beginning to show its neglect. I'm not sure if you're aware of this, and if you have any powers or influence or opportunities to actually speak to the landowner, who I believe is the same landowner who owns the old Zigzag buildings, and whether we can actually bring this building back into operation again, because it's a vitally important part of St John's. It's the only really remaining part of the old Tybridge Street area, which is still standing. A very historical pub in the area, and it's something which is very valued by the local community. And I'm very sad about its current appearance.
Through you, Chair, I can say that I thank you, Councillor Udall, for raising that with me. As you will gather from the answer I gave to Councillor Amos earlier, the applicant and the owner of that property and I are in fairly regular communication about various of his sites around the city, and I will make a particular point at the next opportunity I have to raise that with him. And I will ask to have a visit there, I think, to look at it. And subject to it not meeting or not meeting the various criteria for being included on the Heritage at Risk Register, if it passes the test for inclusion on it, I'll see that it gets added to the edition next year. And I thank you for raising it with me this afternoon. I will do so.
Councillor Agar.
Thank you, Chair. Two or three things, really. Starting with the farrier's house on Bath Road. It's not listed at the moment. Is there any reasonable prospect of it being designated in any way? That's one. Do you want to answer that first?
spoken to my colleagues in the heritage section and who maintain the heritage at risk register. We are in the process of looking at updating and reviewing the local list, so that is one that is going to be added to it immediately, because that is within our gift. I am in regular contact with Liz Fuller, who is the case officer at Save Britain's Heritage. She's very excited about this. She believes that it's one of, if not the last purpose-built farrier shops in the country. If you think about the time that it was built, plans were passed in 1913, probably built early 1914, lots more motor vehicles, fewer horses around, and a lot of horses that were around went over onto the Western Front. So it's possibly one of the last buildings of its kind to be built. And if we, working together, can substantiate that history and that story to it, then there may be a chance of putting it forward to statutory listing.
Thank you. That's really quite encouraging, because I mean, its date is really historically significant, and it may, as you said, be historically significant to the whole of the country, not just us. So that's quite, yeah, pleasing, actually.
Again, through your chair, you make a very good point. One of the differences between local lists and statutory lists is that their importance is more than local, which is fairly self-evident. But if they can list something that stands in the place, or as they say, instead of, lots of similar things that have gone elsewhere, and it can be just a representative example. And the great thing about it is it's very readable. I mean, the thing that strikes you is, why has it got that horseshoe-shaped opening? You know, it shouts at you what it did. And I think if we can substantiate that, it stands a more than reasonable chance.
Thank you. I mean, that's quite exciting. Thank you for telling us that. Another thing was, I just wanted to sort of, for the benefit of members, to say that about the ownership of the Gaumont is the chief thing that's holding you up there, isn't it? The ownership of the Gaumont being difficult to establish.
Yeah, it is difficult. I was talking with my colleague in legal earlier this week, who they have had some, on a different issue relating to the use of the car park at the rear, but just in establishing quite who owns it and quite who you need to talk to about that. So if just put a general plea out through you, Chair, anybody in the room who knows any contacts with the building, then we'd be very grateful.
Thank you. May I just, one more? Going back to Caudles, I appreciate Councillor Udall's concern about it. It has been a concern for a lot of us for a number of years, and I can see that it has been for you. I wasn't quite sure what you'd said about it at some point. Is it your view that it will be reconstructed on site, or is it likely to go to, say, Avonscroft Museum of Buildings or something? I know we've got the facade at least in storage, but
in its original position as part of the new development. It won't be used as a shop.
thank you. And
But it will be there.
I'd just like to endorse Councillor Amos's comments about the bridge, Howick Bridge.
Thank you.
Councillor Reg?
Thank you, Chair. Could I ask, please, about the Trots Hill Lane, 3 Trots Hill Lane on page 27? As far as I know, they've built an extension to the side of this cottage and knocked substantial bits of it down in order to attach the extension to the framework. I think I've got the right building. I just wondered whether that's all been done above board and with the necessary permissions, or whether they're just being sort of stretching the boundaries of legality, is the phrase I'm looking for.
Thank you very much, Councillor Roger. To say the least, what happened on site there. The owner got consent to convert an outbuilding into a house for a limited amount of time to allow them to do the work on the cottage. But that was about 10 years ago. And they got a license to do it for 18 months. And so it's gone on quite a long time. There's been various incidents, a number of break-ins. There was a break-in that led to a very small fire. The building got boarded up. Again, going back to what Paul Round said about enforcement action and enforcement work. Our enforcement officer has worked very hard on the owner of the building, who is now doing work on the interior of it. We do not believe that any significant portion of the historic cottage has been demolished. But I stand to be corrected if anybody knows any better, but it is not our understanding that it has. And it's certainly not the case if you follow the planning history through.
When did you last look at it, may I ask?
I haven't been for about, sorry, but our enforcement officer goes almost monthly, sometimes fortnightly.
Yeah, I think if you've got more questions about that, maybe we do it outside the meeting, if
Yeah.
that's okay. Have we got any other comments? Councillor Smith?
Yes, I simply want to endorse what Councillor Amos has said about Powick Bridge, as it's of great concern to me.
Great, thank you. I've just got a couple of comments. I'm really pleased to see the Gaumont Cinema Theatre on the list now. That has been a real concern to local residents, and particularly people who are fans of music and see it as a really important site for the heritage. So it's really great that it's on the list. And obviously, I really appreciate that the list is actually a useful tool for getting action on these buildings at risk, as well as being a source of information and a focus for our neglected buildings. And really focusing on the 3 Angel Street, that was through the Property Enhancement Grant Scheme. And that's another City Council way of helping people take action on their buildings.
Yes, thank you, Chair. And through you, 1A Angel Street was done through the same grant scheme as well.
Okay, yeah, lovely. So really, this is a great tool. It's a report that we need to note, but also approve for publication. The register is intended to keep attention on our historic buildings. We're a city with huge heritage, so I really appreciate the work of officers. Councillor Cross, you have a comment?
Sorry, I had a question that wasn't clear enough about flagging it up. Is it right to ask now? It's a quick one.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So, heritage at risk. I would just want to raise a question of whether Middle Batton Hall Farm, that land, which was if it gets developed, you lose the ability to read the site. And I was speaking with a colleague earlier about this. And albeit there weren't deaths on site in the Civil War, but is that site within our heritage at risk in terms of battlefields, so within paragraph 2? Thank you.
Again, through your chair, you entirely identified the point, Councillor Cross, as to why it's not on a registered battlefield, because no lives were lost on the site. It is something that we could look at locally rather than going through the battlefields process, I think.
Okay.
But it's very important. I was having a long chat in the gap between the training and this meeting with Councillor Agar about this, and it's very, very important.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chair.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, and just to reiterate, really, we had some heritage training before the meeting. This is all about upskilling all the committee members on various aspects of planning, but I think the slides will be available to people who missed it. So please look at them and, ask questions if you need to. Are we done with questions and comments on this? Are we ready to vote? So this is that the committee notes the contents of the 2024 Heritage at Risk Register and approves it for publication. Can I see your hands in favour? Thank you, that's unanimous. Okay, so we'll just move on to item 7. This is the neighbour notification guidance note, and this is being presented by by Charlotte. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. So, as you said, this is a notification guidance for neighbour notifications on planning applications, listed building consents and all the other applications that we have to notify neighbours on. This item is brought to committee for note only. The purpose of the guidance really is to provide clarification of the extent of neighbour notification letters, so who we will actually notify in writing that an application has been received by the council. And the reason that we've produced the guidance is because the statutory requirement is quite vague. What it requires the council to do is either display a site notice, or at least one notice, for not less than 21 days on the site, near or on the land, or serve by letter on adjoining owners or occupiers. So the term adjoining isn't clarified in the legislation. So the purpose of the guidance note is for officers, when they're registering applications and sending out those letters, to be consistent. And by publishing this guidance to the website, it's then open and transparent for residents. So if they don't receive a letter, they can have a look on the guidance note to see whether they should have had one and whether it's been an oversight, or say, and then they can just check to see if they should have had that letter. Additionally, that's a procedural process, but when the officer, the planning officer, goes out on site to assess the proposal, they will also just double check, because in terms of context, it could be that the guidance sets out the adjoining neighbours that would be notified, depending on whether the proposal's at the front or the back. But because of the land levels, for instance, it could be that an additional neighbour should be notified. And also looking at the scale and type of the proposal as well, and the wider implications that that will have. The format of the letter doesn't change. It will provide all the details it does at the moment. So the purpose of the guidance is, as I say, to clarify so that we can be consistent and open and transparent on the notification process. It has been trialled by officers, and we understand that it's working well. So it's now noted for committee that it will be then posted on the website, so that if you receive questions from some of your local residents, you can ask them to have a look at the guidance to see whether they fall within the scope of that notification or not. But again, it should provide a higher quality service from the council in that we will be consistent. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Charlotte. I really appreciate this guidance note. Do I have any questions for the officer? Councillor Cross and Councillor Amos?
It's a comment rather than a question. It's a comment of massive appreciation. So this was, really lovely to see this coming into fruition. It's something we've been sort of keen to see happening. So thank you very much.
Councillor Amos?
Yeah, thank you. It's questions and comments, really. I've always felt, and still do, that the whole planning process is on the side of developers, not on the side of local residents. And so I always look to try and level the playing field a bit. And I think the whole issue of neighbour notification is very important. I mean, I know technically you could put a sign up on a lamppost. How many people actually see this? When you see that notice? Or you can put an advert in the local paper. How many people actually see it? And I think we all know that putting a sign up on a lamppost, putting an advert in the newspaper is all very fine. It might tick all the boxes, but most people don't actually see it. And what I'm concerned is that people whose environment, whose community is going to be permanently changed by development should at least know about it as far in advance as possible and as widely as possible. And so I'm, to be honest, Chair, I'm dead against trying to limit the number of consultation letters, for example, that go out. Let's keep it as wide as possible, because it might be, for example, you have a development, say, in a cul-de-sac, and then so you do just the neighbours. But anybody walking in and out of that cul-de-sac is actually affected. They might live, 10 houses away, but they're just as affected as perhaps people who live 3 houses away. And so I really think that the people whose community and whose environment is going to be affected permanently, they're the ones we should be concentrating on. Not trying to tick boxes, well, the guidance says we've got to do this, we've got to do that, and we do that, so that's okay. My view is that many people, when there's a planning application that affects them, really don't know what it's about. I mean, let's be honest, the planning process is not simple to understand. And so people say, well, we've heard about it, what's going to happen, what do we do, who do we complain to? Well, they just do not know the process. So it's all very well saying we put a letter through your door, that's it. It isn't. Very many of the people who object or who are concerned are elderly. So they don't do all this IT computer stuff. They really don't. And it bothers me that with the questions I get from residents, they simply don't understand the process and say, oh, well, it's all cut and dried anyway, I won't bother. And that bothers me because that's anti-democratic. We should make it clear that everybody's voice counts, but they can only put their voice in if they know something is there to be commented on. So what I'm asking, Chair, through you, is that the consultation we do is as wide as possible. I know there is a cost involved in this, but I think democracy does have a price. And I think it's a price worth paying. Because what is happening with these planning applications, with any planning application, is something will have changed permanently. And the residents there are entitled to know and feel that they've been involved. They may lose the battle at the end of the day, but at least they will feel that they've had their say and it's been listened to. It won't be listened to if they don't know about it and they don't put their objections in.
Through you, Chair. Thank you for your questions, and we do understand your concerns, Councillor Amos. As you've said, unless somebody knows about something, they can't make representations. If you refer to Appendix 1, there is a chart there about the different types. It breaks it down into different types of development and the range, the scope of notifications that will be sent out. It does go beyond, in my view, what the statutory requirement is, that it should be for adjoining landowners. It already goes beyond that. But like in most things in planning, we've got to balance the statutory requirements, the cost involved, as you said, but also if we go too far on certain types of applications and then don't go the same distance on another application, we could open ourselves up to ombudsman complaints as well. So the purpose of the guidance is to provide that consistency. But the officer's job when they go out on site is to look, and as you say, in the instance where a development might affect everybody in the cul-de-sac, because of the nature of the development, it's a care home that accesses off the end of the cul-de-sac rather than a conservatory on the back of one of the properties in the cul-de-sac. Those sorts of differences will be teased out by the planning officer, and they will widen the scope of neighbour notifications if it's required. But the guidance actually goes through the different types of development anyway. It breaks it down. So a dormer window on the back of a property would get less neighbour notifications sent out than on a wider ranging scheme. So I think the guidance is nuanced enough that it will address those concerns. And perhaps one last thing, and it's quite subtle, neighbours don't need a letter, or residents don't need a letter from us to make comments. So if we've notified a fair range of local residents, they speak amongst themselves. If it's in the conservation area, it's a listed building, there will be the site notice as well that we have to display. That's another statutory requirement on top of the neighbour notification letters. So once people are aware of a proposal, anyone can write in or comment online or whichever way suits them. So we hope that this guidance has struck that right balance.
Thank you, Chair. If I just very briefly come back on that, if I may. I'm grateful to the officers' comments, but of course, the fundamental purpose of my point was that the planning process is inherently against local residents. So, of course, the guidance that stems from that is going to be seen in the sense that, well, there's a development here, the onus is that should go ahead unless there's reasons to stop it, rather than this level playing field. So, of course, the guidance that they're producing is going to be minimalist, in my opinion. And when you say certain people don't need it because anybody can object, well, you're absolutely right. Anybody know about it can object. But it comes back to the first point that I made, that if people don't know that something's going to happen, they can't object because they don't know about it. So it's getting the knowledge out that there's an application coming in. Because how on earth can people know about it? And lots of my residents who are elderly won't have a clue. Well, we'll go online and we'll check this and we'll put our, that kind of stuff. They just simply don't know. And since we all, I suspect, around the table know this in our hearts, we know what I'm saying is true, we really need to go the extra mile. And I'm not sure what the extra cost is. If you're going to put letters perhaps through 6 letterboxes, I mean, how much more does it cost to put them through 10 letterboxes? That's my point. I'm just trying to level the playing field.
Through you, Councillor Amos, I think what Charlotte has been saying before, we agree with you.
Oh, good.
And that's the reason why, and as Charlotte said right at the beginning, the statutory requirement is quite minimal. Yes. And what this is doing is going, may not the extra mile, it might be an extra half a mile, but one of the key things within the guidance notes is that this is the minimum that we will do. So what's set out within the tables are the minimum. So the statutory requirement is here. We're now saying that we're going to do a minimum here. Now, that might be that we actually go the extra mile because we're over there, but actually what we need to do from an ombudsman point of view and from a developer's point of view, that we're not just picking on a developer because we're consulting more people just because we don't like a developer, we're saying we're being consistent. So what we are doing is going over and above what we need to do. We're saying exactly how we will consult. But I agree with you that we need to make as many people aware of this as possible within reason, and that's proportionate to the size of the development. So hopefully that we're on the same page and that we'll be able to move on forward from there. So hopefully that's helpful.
That is very helpful, Chair, but given my physique, you know, I would rather do the marathon than the half marathon.
I've got Councillor Kimberley.
I was just going to put a contrary opinion on the record, as is my wont. I was going to say I actually think that a very elegant balance has been struck with these recommendations. I think it's important, obviously, that as many people do know about changes as possible, but there is such a thing as sort of a limit, and obviously writing letters out to residents is not free. It does cost the council each time that happens, and I realise that there has to be a point where we consider the logic of writing to someone on the other side of the city about a repainting of a window that's happening in one corner of the city. I also think it is worth bearing in mind that were we to make it too difficult to get planning applications approved, then we would have a great deal more added to the heritage at risk list, because nothing would ever get approved ever at all, and buildings don't tend to improve over time without maintenance. So I just wanted to put my comments on the record. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Cross, please.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I absolutely note this is a minimum and that we're aiming to set out, to show our thinking, which I think is good transparency. And of course, these things can change over time as members see fit, and as officers confirm is compliant. Members do receive weekly updates that include planning applications, and so we can alert our ward residents, and something I've asked for, but would perhaps need further consideration and thought and agreement, would be a map-based search function. So, for example, if you looked up your My Local Area that we spoke about as a page, as a function on the residents page of the City Council website, if there was a link to local planning applications, etc., search for planning applications in your area, that sort of function. I found it very useful in a neighbouring district with the map-based search, because the names, particularly in certain areas, can be very difficult unless you get the name and address exactly as written on the application. You can sometimes feel like you're swimming upstream. But yeah, that's obviously a consideration for future. Everything that makes life easier and better. I appreciate an awful lot of this is online only, and that's a very cost-effective way to provide information. The challenge, I suppose, for us members is how to make sure members who don't do online, local residents who don't do online, that they're not left behind. So maybe that's down to us. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments, Councillor Cross. Can I just ask, would this guidance note be reviewed at all? Will it be annually reviewed or anything like that?
Yes, I mean, it's with all guidance notes, it's going to have to be reviewed. So yes, let's commit to an annual review.
Wonderful, thank you. Okay, so got any other comments? No? Okay, lovely. So our recommendation here is that the committee notes the neighbour notification guidance note. Can I see hands in favour of noting it?
I don't know how not to note it, Chair, so
I totally agree, but I wanted us to have unanimous on everything today, so I thought that would be a nice way of doing it. I don't have any other business, so therefore I can bring this meeting to a close. Thank you.